Hello and welcome to English 2450, COM 2010, Intro to Film, Week 8, lecture video number 1 on editing the basics. In this video, I'll be providing a brief overview of what editing is, and some technological terms as well: frame, shot, transitions, cuts, dissolves, fades, and wipes. And I'll also be introducing the idea of the 4 areas of control that an editor has over the film, which are graphic, rhythmic, spatial, and temporal. But let's start with a definition. Film editing is the process of selecting, arranging, and assembling the essential components of a movie: visual, sound, and special effects. An easier way to state this, and maybe a little bit too simple, is that editing is the coordination of one shot with the next shot. This is where you take the basic building blocks of film, the shot, the frame, the sequence, and you add them all together and arrange them in a way that makes sense and tells a story. But before you can understand film as a whole, you have to understand what those building blocks are and what they're called. So we do have to get into a little bit of film terminology here. Frames, shots, and transitions. Now, when I refer to a frame or a cell, I'm referring to a single image on the strip of film. This is essentially a photograph, right? When you put a whole bunch of photographs on a film strip together and you project that at a high rate of speed, it gives the illusion of motion. That's why films are motion pictures or movies. They move. But if you slow that down, if you pause it, you get a single image on the strip of film, and this is known as a frame. When you put a whole bunch of frames together, you get a shot. Now, in the process of shooting, a shot is an uninterrupted run of the camera to expose a series of frames. Sometimes this is also referred to as a take. So this is where long shot and long take start to get a little bit complicated, because shot and take are often used interchangeably, but long shot and long take do not mean the same thing. Of course, we have to make the terminology as complicated as possible, right? So in shooting, an uninterrupted run of the camera to expose a series of frames is called a shot. Now, in the finished film, one uninterrupted image is known as a shot. And it does not matter if there's mobile framing, if the camera is moving or if it's still. As long as there is an uninterrupted image, that is referred to as a shot. As soon as you interrupt that image with a transition, then you have moved on to another shot. So in my examples, I'll refer to things like shot A and shot B. Shot A is an uninterrupted run of frames. Shot B is a different uninterrupted run of frames. And between those two, shot A and shot B, is a transition. There is a way that shot A and shot B are joined together, right? So there are different types of transitions. There are different ways to transition in a film from shot A to shot B. Now, these include the fade out, the fade in, the dissolve, the wipe, and most commonly, the cut. A fade out is where you start with the film image and you gradually darken it so that the end of the shot is totally black. Fade to black, fading out. Fading in is the opposite. It's where you start with black and you gradually fade in to show the image. So fade out and fade in are reverses of each other. A dissolve is where you briefly superimpose the end of shot A and the beginning of shot B so that you can see both of those images layered on top of each other. A dissolve. Superimposition of one image onto another to show a transition between shot A and shot B. A dissolve usually means that a small amount of time has passed. Fade in and fade out sometimes mean that a longer period of time has passed, but it really depends on how the director and the editor are using it. Now, a wipe is a little bit more specific. A wipe is where there is a boundary line that moves across the screen, right from left to right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. You can have different shapes, etc. But a wipe is where there is a boundary line that moves across the screen and basically shot B pushes shot A off of the screen. It wipes it away. Now, this is probably most common from the Star Wars films. I will show an example in class to show you the difference between fading out, fading in, dissolves, and wipes. It helps to have examples to kind of clarify what this looks like in practice, but the basic idea is you fade out into black, you fade in from black, you dissolve two images on top of one another, and then you wipe one image off the screen with another. Those are different types of transitions, ways to move from shot A to shot B. The most common type of transition, though, is the cut. The cut is the most common way to join two shots together. Now, a cut is perceived by the viewer as an instantaneous change from one shot to another. A fade, a dissolve, a wipe, all of those things take a little bit of time and they draw attention to themselves. A cut does not draw attention to itself typically. It's an instantaneous change from one shot to another. This is so commonly used to piece films together that we often do not even notice the cutting at all. That's why editing is known as an invisible art. The better the editor does their job, the less visible the cuts are. This is a common way to join different shots together. Now, most editing is done now digitally. Very rarely do you get the old school physical act of editing where cutting was literally taking a film strip, using a pair of scissors, or like an X-Acto knife type thing, to cut it into segments and splicing them back together using a certain type of like film cement or tape. Now, that's how film was edited up until the digital era, where it was a literal act of cutting with a pair of scissors and then splicing back together using cement or tape. That's why it's called a cut, right? You'd use a pair of scissors and you would cut. Now, it's helpful to remember that, even though films are now done digitally and there's no longer a pair of scissors that you use to cut the film strip, but it's helpful to remember that that's why it's called a cut, because it reinforces the idea of like kind of an instantaneous change from one shot to another shot. So that is the cut. And one thing that we're going to do in class is watch through a clip from a film and look for the cut specifically. When you start to look for cuts and transitions, you can see them, but typically they're invisible. So it's hard to describe how they work because our brains are really trained at this point to gloss over the act of cutting in film. Now, the next thing that I wanted to do just kind of a brief overview of, and I'll break down in more detail in the next film, is that editing offers the filmmaker four kind of main areas of control. You can break down editing effects into four kind of big categories: graphic, rhythmic, spatial, and temporal. Now, in the next video, I'll be talking about how graphic and rhythmic relations are created between shots. In the following video, lecture video number 3 for this week, I'll talk about spatial and temporal relations between shots. And then in the final video for the week, I'll talk a little bit about continuity editing, how it's defined, the rules, the techniques, and what are the alternatives to continuity editing. So stay tuned for lecture videos 2, 3, and 4.